In the courtroom, his family is shocked to see his disfigured face.
Just like in the video you just saw, prison can turn hardened adult criminals to look like lost, pitiful puppies. You'd think it would be limited to just adult criminals, and you'd be very wrong. Every now and then, you hear a story of a kid who commits unspeakable crimes, is caught, and then sent to prison. The normal reaction of anyone would be gladness that justice has been served. The only problem, however, is the other side of the story you don't hear about, the side describing what justice looks like. Well, you're about to see stories of evil kids and how they may be attacked in prison, and at the end of it all, you'll think again about how much justice you want served. Mary Bell, Tyneside Strangler.
11 years old when she strangled to death 2 young boys in the Scotswood area of Newcastle's West End. One was 4 and one was only 3 years old, one of which she partially mutilated.
In the quiet streets of Newcastle upon Tyne, England, a sinister presence lurked beneath the innocent facade of a young girl named Mary Bell. Born in the late 1950s, Mary displayed disturbing behavior from an early age, foreshadowing the darkness that would consume her. At just 10 years old, she committed her first murder, sending shockwaves through the community and leaving a trail of terror in her wake. It was a sunny day in May when Mary's reign of darkness began. She lured a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown to an abandoned house where she proceeded to strangle him with a piece of string. The details of this heinous act are too gruesome to recount, but suffice it to say, the innocence of childhood was shattered that day, and Mary was known as the Tyneside Strangler. The community was left in a state of disbelief and fear as they grappled with the reality that a child could be capable of such evil. But Mary was far from finished. Just a few short months later, she struck again, this time with the help of her friend, Norma Bell, no relation. Together, they targeted another young boy, 3-year-old Brian Howe. On a fateful day in July, Mary and Norma lured Brian to a secluded area where they subjected him to unimaginable horrors. The innocence of childhood had been shattered once again, and the world was left to grapple with the unimaginable reality that children could commit such heinous acts. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion fell upon Mary, whose disturbing behavior had not gone unnoticed by those around her. She displayed a cold and calculated demeanor, showing no remorse for her actions. It was clear that she was not an ordinary child, but a vessel for darkness. When confronted by authorities, Mary initially denied any involvement in the crimes, but as the evidence mounted against her, she eventually confessed to the murders, revealing the chilling details of her actions. The nation was left in shock as they tried to comprehend how a child could harbor such darkness within. Mary's trial captivated the nation as the world watched in horror as the true extent of her evil was laid bare. Despite her young age, she was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The court recognized that Mary's actions were not those of a typical child, but the result of a disturbed and troubled mind. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, a term used for indefinite detention in cases involving minors. The decision sparked a nationwide debate on the nature of evil and the capacity for children to commit such heinous acts. Many questioned whether Mary could ever be rehabilitated, or if she would forever remain a symbol of the darkest corners of humanity. Initially, Bell was held in a remand home in Durham, but was later moved to a second remand home in South Norwood. Subsequently, she was transferred to the Red Bank Secure Unit in Newton-le-Willows, Merseyside, an institution for young offenders. At this facility, Bell was the only female among around 24 inmates. Unfortunately, Bell would later disclose that she experienced sexual abuse from both a staff member and several inmates during her time at this institution, stating that the abuse began when she was just 13 years old. When she turned 16 in November 1973, she was transferred to a secure wing of HM prison style in Cheshire. It is reported that Bell felt resentful about being moved to this facility, and despite her efforts, she was unsuccessful in her application for parole while serving her sentence there. Bell was eventually released in 1980. Jesse Pomroy, the Boston boy fiend. In the late 19th century, the city of Boston was gripped by fear as a young boy named Jesse Pomroy unleashed a reign of terror that would forever stain its history. Born with a darkness lurking within, Jesse displayed signs of sadism from a young age, foreshadowing the horrors that awaited the unsuspecting victims who crossed his path. At just 14 years old, Jesse embarked on a spree of torture and murder that would send disrupt the city. His first known victim was a young boy named Horace Millen, whom Jesse lured to a secluded area under the pretense of showing him a fort. Once, there he subjected Horace to unspeakable acts of violence, leaving the young boy battered and lifeless. Unfortunately, his reign of terror did not end with Horace. Emboldened by his first taste of blood, Jesse continued his spree, targeting other young boys who fell victim to his twisted desires. The city was paralyzed with fear as parents kept a watchful eye on their children, terrified that they could be the next target of this young monster. Jesse's crimes escalated in brutality as he refined his methods of torture and murder. murder. His victims, mostly young boys, suffered unimaginable horrors at his hands. Some were stabbed repeatedly, while others were strangled or beaten to death. The details of these acts are etched into the annals of history, a chilling reminder of the depths of depravity that Jesse was capable of at such a young age. The city of Boston was in a state of panic as the body count continued to rise. Authorities launched a massive manhunt, desperate to bring an end to Jesse's reign of terror. It was not long before they apprehended him, and the true extent of his sadistic acts was laid bare for the world to see. Jesse's trial captivated the nation, and his crimes were revealed in gruesome detail. The courtroom was filled with a mix of horror and disbelief as witnesses recounted the atrocities committed by this young boy. The jury, faced with overwhelming evidence, found Jesse guilty of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. Jesse Pomroy was brought to see one of his victims' bodies and questioned about his involvement in the murder. However, during the coroner's inquest, Pomroy was denied the right to have a lawyer present. The trial of Commonwealth v. Pomroy took place in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court in Suffolk County, Boston, on December 9th and December 10th, 1874. The Attorney General argued for a guilty verdict of first-degree murder. In his closing statements, the Attorney General suggested an alternative charge of murder with extreme atrocity, which under Massachusetts law is also considered first-degree murder, but differs in the requirement of premeditation. On December 10th, 1874, Pomroy was declared guilty, with the jury recommending mercy due to his young age. Pomroy's attorney, Charles Robinson, filed 2 exceptions, but they were rejected in February 1875, and Pomroy was sentenced to death by hanging. However, it was up to the governor to sign the death warrant and schedule Pomroy's execution. Governor William Gaston refused to fulfill this responsibility, leaving the only avenue for sparing Pomroy's life through the Massachusetts Governor's Council. For Pomroy's sentence to be commuted, a simple majority of the 9-member council had to vote in favor. Over the next year and a half, the council voted twice in support of Pomroy's execution, but Governor Gaston refused to sign the death warrant each time. In August 1876, an anonymous third vote was taken by the council, resulting in Pomroy's sentence being commuted to life imprisonment in solitary confinement. On September 7, 1876, Pomroy was transferred from Suffolk County Jail to Charlestown State Prison, where he began his life in solitary confinement at the young age of 16 years and 9 months. Pomroy remained incarcerated at Charlestown State Prison. In 1929, as an elderly man in poor health, Pomroy was transferred to Bridgewater Hospital for the criminally insane, where he passed away on September 29, 1932. Joshua Phillips. Joshua Phillips was a teenager whose actions changed Jacksonville in the 1990s. At first glance, Joshua appeared to be an ordinary boy, but behind closed doors, he harbored a dark secret. At the age of 14, he committed a crime that would forever haunt the city. It was a day like any other when Joshua's path crossed with that of 8-year-old Maddie Clifton. What started as a seemingly innocent interaction quickly turned into a nightmare. In a fit of rage, Joshua brutally murdered Maddie, leaving her lifeless body hidden beneath his bed. When Maddie's body was discovered, the city was gripped by fear and disbelief. How could a child commit such a heinous act? The investigation unfolded and Joshua was apprehended, his dark secret exposed for all to see. The nation grappled with the haunting question of what drives a child to commit such unspeakable acts. As the community rallied together to search for Maddie, little did they know that the person responsible was living among them, hiding in plain sight. On November 10th, Melissa Phillips went into her son's room and noticed a wet spot on the floor. She searched the room and found Clifton's body, immediately leaving the house to report the incident to the police. Phillips was arrested later that day at his school and confessed to the murder within hours. Prosecutors disputed some parts of Phillips's story. State Attorney Harry Shorstein suggested the murder may have been sexually motivated, saying that Phillips had talked about sexual matters with both Maddie Clifton and her older sister. Phillips stated that he killed Clifton to stop her from crying after she was accidentally struck with a baseball while they were playing, and that he feared punishment from his abusive father. The trial that followed was filled with emotional testimony and conflicting accounts of what truly happened that fateful day. The courtroom became a battleground of legal strategies and moral dilemmas. The fate of Joshua Phillips hung in the balance as the jury deliberated his guilt or innocence. Although elements of Phillips's story are disputed, officials who were involved in his prosecution have subsequently expressed contrition over the severity of his sentence. Phillips was eligible for resentencing in 2023. Today, Joshua remains incarcerated at the Cross City Correctional Institution, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. But as the years go by, questions arise about the severity of his punishment and the potential for redemption considering the life he is currently living in prison. John Dillinger, Born in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1903, Dillinger grew up in a household filled with turmoil and instability. His parents, John Wilson Dillinger and Mary Ellen Lancaster, struggled with their own personal demons, which had a profound impact on young John. From an early age, Dillinger found himself drawn to trouble. He frequently got into trouble at school and had a rebellious streak that seemed to follow him wherever he went. As he grew older, Dillinger dropped out of school and began working in a machine shop, but his restless spirit and desire for excitement led him down a different path. In 1923, at the age of 20, Dillinger enlisted in the United States Navy. However, his time in the military was short-lived, as he deserted just a few months later. This act of defiance foreshadowed the rebellious nature that would define much of Dillinger's life. After leaving the Navy, Dillinger married Beryl Ethel Hovius in 1924. However, the marriage did little to quell his criminal tendencies. He soon turned to a life of crime, engaging in robberies and other illegal activities. It wasn't long before Dillinger found himself on the wrong side of the law. Dillinger's criminal career began in his early 20s when he was sentenced to prison for a botched robbery. His time in prison exposed him to a criminal underworld and the company of seasoned criminals, which ultimately influenced his path towards becoming a more accomplished criminal. The prison environment, instead of rehabilitating him, seemed to amplify his criminal tendencies. Dillinger studied the methods of criminals, honed his skills, and formed connections that would prove invaluable in his future criminal endeavors. After serving 9.5 years in prison, Dillinger was paroled in 1933. Many hoped that his time behind bars had reformed him, but it quickly became apparent that Dillinger had no intention of leaving his criminal past behind. He immediately returned to a life of crime, robbing banks and evading law enforcement. Dillinger formed a new gang, which became known as the Dillinger Gang. Together, they embarked on a spree of bank robberies. Their audacity and disregard for the law made them the most wanted criminals in America. During this time, Dillinger also formed a relationship with Evelyn Billy Frechette, a woman who would become his loyal companion and partner in crime. Their love story, filled with danger and excitement, only added to the mystique surrounding Dillinger. But with their criminal activities came violent confrontations with law enforcement. Dillinger and his gang engaged in numerous shootouts, resulting in injuries and deaths on both sides. The daring escapes and narrow brushes with death only added to Dillinger's legend. John Dillinger is widely regarded as a notorious criminal who played a role in the formation of the FBI. This raises questions about the effectiveness of prison for young offenders. Dillinger, who was relatively young when he was incarcerated, experienced a transformation during his time behind bars, becoming a hardened criminal, as he admitted himself. This raises an important question. Does prison truly have a positive impact on young offenders? While incarceration aims to punish and rehabilitate individuals, there are cases where it may have unintended consequences. Prisons can serve as training grounds for criminal behavior, exposing young offenders to even more dangerous influences and criminal networks. The case of John Dillinger highlights the need for a comprehensive approach to juvenile justice. Instead of solely relying on punitive measures, it is crucial to incorporate educational programs, vocational training, counseling, and mentorship opportunities to steer young offenders towards positive pathways. Rehabilitation should be a primary goal, providing individuals with the skills and support they need to reintegrate into society as law-abiding citizens. Lionel Tate. One notable example of kids who return to crime after release is the case of Lionel Tate, who was just 13 years old when he was convicted of first-degree murder in 2001. After serving 3 years in prison, Tate was released on probation. However, he found himself entangled in the criminal justice system again, as he violated his probation and was subsequently imprisoned for robbery in 2005. The lack of proper support and rehabilitation during his initial incarceration contributed to his relapse into criminal behavior. Our story begins in January 2001, when Tate was just 13 years old. He stood trial for the brutal battering death of 6-year-old Tiffany Unick. On that fateful day of July 28, 1999, Tate was left alone with Tiffany, who was being babysat by his mother, Kathleen Grosset Tate. As the children played downstairs, Tate's mother called out to them, urging them to be quiet. Tiffany was not breathing. What awaited his mother in that room would forever haunt her nightmares. The prosecution would later reveal the extent of Tiffany's injuries, a litany of pain that no child should ever endure. A fractured skull, a lacerated liver, a fractured rib, and a swollen brain were just a few of the wounds inflicted upon her fragile frame. The prosecution likened her injuries to those sustained from falling from a 3-story building. Critics, including various groups listed in the amicus brief attached to Tate's appeal, argued vehemently against convicting preteen children of first-degree murder without proving their intent to cause harm, let alone serious injury or death. They deemed it unacceptable to hold children accountable for crimes of such magnitude without considering their age and capacity capacity for understanding the consequences of their actions. The controversy surrounding Tate's case reached its zenith when a state appeals court overturned his conviction in January 2004. The basis for the overturning was the failure to conduct a mental competency evaluation before his trial. He was released and on probation 3 years after the gruesome murder. However, Tate's story did not end there. On May 23, 2005, he found himself entangled in the web of criminality once again. Charged with armed burglary with battery, armed robbery, and violation of probation, Tate's actions shocked even those who had followed his case closely. This time he threatened a Domino's pizza delivery man, Walter Ernest Gallardo, with a handgun outside a friend's apartment after placing an order. Gallardo, fearing for his life, dropped the 4 pizzas and fled the scene, but Tate's rampage continued. He re-entered the apartment and assaulted the occupant who did not want him inside. Gallardo, upon reaching the Domino's store, immediately called 911 and returned to identify Tate. The Broward County Sheriff's Office issued a statement revealing the harrowing details of the incident. However, no gun was recovered, leaving many questions unanswered. Today, Lionel Tate remains imprisoned in the Charlotte Correctional Institution, serving his sentence for the crimes that have forever marked his name in the annals of criminal history. Craig Price, Warwick Slasher. Another example is Craig Price, also known as the Warwick Slasher, who became one of the youngest serial killers in the United States. Convicted of 4 murders at the age of 16, Price served time in a juvenile facility. However, upon release, he continued his violent behavior and even committed further crimes, including assault and burglary. Craig Price terrorized the quiet town of Warwick, Rhode Island between the ages of 13 and 15, committing a series of murders from July 1987 to September 1989. His brutal acts left a community in fear and led to significant changes in state law. The year was 1987 when the peaceful neighborhood of Warwick, Rhode Island was forever scarred by the actions of a young boy named Craig Price. Born on October 11, 1973, Price seemed like an ordinary child, but beneath his innocent facade lurked a darkness that would soon be unleashed. It was the night of July 27, 1987, when Price broke into a home just 2 houses away from his own. With a heart filled with malice, he took a knife from the kitchen and embarked on a path of unimaginable violence. His victim was 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer, a woman who had no idea that her life was about to be brutally cut short. Price stabbed her a horrifying 58 times, leaving a scene of unimaginable carnage in his wake. Price's thirst for blood was far from quenched. Over 2 years later, on September 1, 1989, he struck again, this time targeting the Heaton family, his own neighbors. High on marijuana and LSD, Price embarked on a killing spree that would forever stain the history of Warwick. His first victim that fateful day was 39-year-old Joan Heaton, mother who had no idea that her life was about to be brutally taken from her. Price stabbed her a horrifying 57 times, leaving her lifeless body in the kitchen. But the horror didn't end there. Joan's 10-year-old daughter, Jennifer, witnessed the brutal murder of her mother, a sight that no child should ever have to endure. In a twisted act of cruelty, Price turned his attention to Jennifer, stabbing her 62 times. The young girl's life was tragically cut short, her innocence stolen by the hands of a merciless killer. The youngest daughter, 7-year-old Melissa, also witnessed the horrifying scene unfold before her eyes. Price crushed her skull, inflicting 30 stab wounds upon her fragile body. The stabbings were so brutal that the knife handles broke off, leaving the blades lodged inside the bodies of the victims, a chilling testament to the savagery of Price's actions. The brutality of the murders was mostly unknown at the time, as Price's sealed records prevented the full extent of his crimes from being widely known. However, law enforcement officials were astounded by Price's lack of remorse when he confessed to the crimes. Price's arrest came just a month before his 16th birthday, ensuring that he would be tried and convicted as a minor. By law, this meant that he would be released and his criminal record sealed when he turned 21. Price, however, boasted that he would make history upon his release. The case of Craig Price led to significant changes in state law, allowing juveniles to be tried as adults for serious crimes. However, these changes could not be applied retroactively to Price's case. Rhode Island residents formed the group Citizens Opposed to the Release of Craig Price, advocating for his continued imprisonment due to the brutality of his crimes and the belief of state psychologists that he was unlikely to be rehabilitated. Despite the efforts of the group, Price's release was ultimately prevented due to a series of crimes he committed behind bars while held at the Rhode Island Training School. These crimes included criminal contempt for refusing a psychological evaluation, extortion for threatening a corrections officer, assault, and violation of probation for engaging in fights while in prison. As a result, Price was sentenced to an additional 10, 25 years depending on his cooperation with treatment. T.J. Lane. On February 27, 2012, the halls of Chardon High School in Chardon, Ohio, were forever stained with the blood of innocent students. It was a day that would go down in infamy as T.J. Lane, a troubled student with a personal rivalry, unleashed a wave of terror that would claim the lives of 3 young individuals and leave a community shattered. T.J. Lane, a seemingly quiet and intelligent student, had a troubled past that hinted at the darkness within. He had previously attended a school for students with behavioral issues, a sign that there were underlying problems that had yet to be addressed, but no one could have predicted the horror that would unfold on that fateful day. Lane's personal rivalry with one of the victims, a student who had recently started dating Lane's ex-girlfriend, fueled a deep-seated anger within him. On that tragic morning, as students gathered in the school cafeteria, Lane seized the opportunity to unleash his rage upon his unsuspecting classmates. Without warning, Lane opened fire on a group of students, targeting his rival with deadly precision. The sound of gunshots echoed through the cafeteria, shattering the peaceful atmosphere and plunging the school into chaos. Teachers Frank Hall and Joseph Ricci bravely intervened, chasing Lane out of the school and preventing further bloodshed. The aftermath of the shooting was devastating. 5 students were hospitalized, their lives forever altered by the physical and emotional scars they would carry. Tragically, 3 young lives were lost that day, their dreams and aspirations cut short by the senseless act of violence. T.J. Lane's trial was held in juvenile court, where he was found competent to stand trial. He later pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including aggravated murder, and was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving at the Warren Correctional Institution in Youngstown, Ohio. However, his imprisonment hasn't led to any positive change in behavior or rehabilitation. Lane has made a number of mistakes during his incarceration, including admitting to using marijuana and foregoing deodorant. He has also displayed aggressive behavior and insubordination. The largest violation occurred in 2014 when the gunman from Chardon School broke out of Oakwood Correctional Facility in Lima, Ohio. The jail warden reported that less than 6 hours later, at a location around 100 yards from the prison, Lane was apprehended. He was apprehended on the north side of the prison, next to a church on Blue Lick Road, by 2 members of the Ohio State Highway Patrol Special Reaction Unit. These examples demonstrate that the prison system, particularly for juvenile offenders, often fails to address the root causes of their criminal behavior. Inadequate rehabilitation programs, lack of educational and vocational opportunities, and limited access to mental health services contribute to a cycle of recidivism. To break this cycle, it is crucial to provide comprehensive in-prison and post-prison support systems that address the multifaceted needs of juvenile offenders. Transitional programs that offer job training, educational support, counseling, and mentorship can significantly reduce their likelihood of reoffending. Additionally, community-based programs that provide a supportive environment for the most evil children and help with reintegration into society have shown promising results in reducing recidivism rates. Click on the next video for more about juvenile true crime stories.